February 19th, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Just before dawn. The desert is quiet in the way only North Africa can be quiet, not peaceful, but watchful. A thin wind slides through the mountain pass, carrying sand that stings exposed skin and coats rifle bolts in grit. Somewhere in the dark, an engine coughs, then goes silent again. American soldiers crouch in shallow foxholes carved into hard, rocky soil. Many of them are barely old enough to shave. Their uniforms are clean, too clean. Their helmets still carry the dull factory sheen that hasn't yet been burned away by months of combat. You can almost feel it, the tension sitting in their chests. Not fear exactly, something worse. Uncertainty. They don't know what's coming through the pass, but they know someone is coming. Across the valley, several miles away, Italian officers stand beside German armored units, binoculars raised. They scan the American positions with something close to amusement. Laughter drifts between them. Not loud, not mocking shouts, just the quiet, dismissive chuckle of men who believe the outcome is already decided. These are Americans, after all. New to the war, new to this desert, new to everything. The Italians have seen armies break before. The Germans beside them have crushed Poland, shattered France, and driven deep into the Soviet Union. Compared to that, these Americans look like tourists who wandered into the wrong war. One Italian officer lowers his binoculars and shakes his head. "They're not ready," he says, and no one argues. The Americans don't hear the laughter. What they hear is the sudden, violent crack of artillery. The first shells land short, fountains of sand and stone erupting in the valley floor. Then the range adjusts. The next volley slams into the American line with terrifying precision. The ground shakes. Men flinch. Someone screams for a medic before the sun is even up. This is not how they imagined their first real fight. Some of these soldiers arrived in North Africa only weeks earlier. They trained in neat rows back home, learned doctrine from manuals, practiced maneuvers on open fields where the enemy politely played along. Here, the enemy does not play along. German panzers begin to move. You hear them before you see them, the low, mechanical growl echoing through the pass, growing louder with every second. Tank silhouettes emerge from the dust, dark and deliberate, their guns already aligned. The Americans fire. Anti-tank rounds streak toward the advancing armor. Some hit, most bounce off, sparking uselessly against thick steel. The tanks do not slow. They never do. Orders crackle over radios, confused, overlapping, sometimes contradictory. Units wait for permission that never comes. Others move without orders at all. And from the ridge lines, the Axis attack rolls forward like a machine that has done this many times before. Back with the Axis observers, the mood barely changes. This is exactly what they expected. Italian officers note how American positions crumble under pressure. German commanders recognize the signs immediately: poor coordination, exposed flanks, artillery firing without infantry support. These Americans fight bravely, that much is clear, but bravery alone doesn't stop tanks. The pass begins to choke with smoke and dust. American trucks burn where they were abandoned. Supply dumps explode in slow, awful fireballs. Entire units lose contact with command and fight on their own, unaware that the line beside them has already collapsed. Men retreat, sometimes in order, sometimes not, and the Axis push harder. By mid-morning, the Kasserine Pass belongs to the attackers. To the Italians watching from the rear, it feels like confirmation, proof, validation. This is what happens when amateurs face professionals. They believe they've learned something important about the Americans today. They believe the Americans will always fight like this. They are wrong. Because what the Axis commanders cannot see, not yet, is what this defeat is doing to the men who survive it. They don't see the officers taking notes in the dark, replaying every mistake. They don't hear the furious arguments in command tents that night. They don't feel the quiet, burning shame settling into American ranks. This loss doesn't break the U.S. Army, it hardens it. And somewhere beyond the dunes, decisions are already being made that will change everything about how these Americans fight next time. The laughter in the desert hasn't stopped yet, but it's about to.
Night falls hard over Tunisia. The desert cools rapidly, heat bleeding out of the sand until the air bites through sweat-soaked uniforms. Fires flicker in the distance, where vehicles still burn, their silhouettes glowing like warning beacons in the dark. American survivors move quietly now. They gather where they can, behind rocks, in shallow wadis, beside wrecked trucks that smell of fuel and cordite. Some sit in silence, staring at nothing. Others shake uncontrollably, hands clenched around rifles they no longer trust. This is the moment after defeat, the moment no training manual prepares you for. Officers take head counts and realize how many names won't answer. Medics work under flashlights, hands slick with blood, trying to save men they trained with back home. Radios crackle with fragments of reports, words like withdrawal, regroup, unknown enemy strength repeating over and over. Somewhere in the darkness, a lieutenant punches the side of a truck until his knuckles split. This wasn't supposed to happen. At higher headquarters, the mood is grim. Maps are spread across tables, weighted down with empty canteens and helmets. Red grease pencil marks slice through American positions. Too many breakthroughs, too many arrows pointing west. Senior officers argue. Some blame the terrain, others blame the equipment. A few quietly admit the truth. They were not ready. American doctrine assumed coordination that didn't exist yet. Infantry advanced without armor. Armor pushed forward without infantry. Artillery fired without accurate intelligence. Air support arrived late or not at all. And when the German counterattack came, it came fast, concentrated, and merciless. This is how experienced armies fight. This is how inexperienced ones learn. The Axis, meanwhile, are pleased. Italian commanders report success up the chain. German officers note captured equipment and prisoners. They speak confidently of pressing the advantage, of exploiting weakness before the Americans can recover. In their minds, Kasserine is proof of something larger. The Americans are clumsy, predictable, soft. They fight with courage, yes, but courage is cheap when it isn't paired with coordination. Some Italian officers joke openly now. They refer to the Americans as ragazzi, boys, well-fed boys who will panic once the real pressure begins. And from everything they've seen so far, the joke seems earned. But back on the American side, something important is happening. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, and it won't make headlines. Men are talking. Not boasting, not joking, talking quietly about what went wrong. Platoon leaders sit with their sergeants and listen, really listen to what the veterans from earlier skirmishes are saying. Tank crews compare notes on German tactics. Artillery officers redraw firing plans again and again, refining them by candlelight. They stop assuming the enemy will behave according to the book. They start adapting. Orders become shorter, clearer. Radio discipline improves. Units begin drilling at night, rehearsing movements over and over until muscle memory replaces hesitation. And above all,
something else spreads through the ranks. Anger. Not reckless anger, focused anger, the kind that sharpens instead of blinding. A decision comes down from above. Command will change. The U.S. Army cannot afford to learn this slowly. New leadership arrives, officers who believe in discipline, coordination, and relentless pressure. Officers who don't care about comfort or excuses. They bring a message that is blunt and unforgiving. Kasserine will not happen again. Mistakes are identified, weak commanders are removed, units are reorganized, training intensifies even as the enemy remains close enough to hear the guns. There is no pause, no retreat to safety, only adjustment under fire. Out in the desert, Axis patrols probe forward and begin to notice something strange. American positions feel different. Fields of fire are better covered. Artillery responds faster. Infantry doesn't break contact as easily. Tanks no longer advance alone. The Americans are learning, but now they are learning fast. And for the first time since Kasserine, Axis commanders begin to feel a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. Because defeats can end armies, or they can forge them. And the Americans, bloodied and embarrassed, are choosing the second path. The next time the Axis attacks, the laughter will not come so easily.
The change doesn't announce itself. There's no speech, no ceremony, no dramatic line drawn in the sand. It begins in small, almost invisible ways. An American sentry doesn't light a cigarette at night anymore. A tank commander waits for infantry before advancing instead of charging ahead. An artillery battery shifts fire within seconds, not minutes. By late February, the desert feels different. Not quieter, sharper. Axis reconnaissance patrols notice it first. They move cautiously now, probing American lines the way they always have. Quick bursts of fire, sudden pressure, testing for weakness. In the past, that pressure caused hesitation, delays, confusion. This time, it brings answers. Machine guns open up in disciplined arcs. Mortars fall with unnerving accuracy. American units hold their ground instead of pulling back, forcing Axis patrols to disengage sooner than planned. The reports begin to change tone. Enemy resistance stronger than expected. American artillery highly responsive. Infantry coordination improved. Italian officers read these lines with raised eyebrows. This isn't what they were promised. Inside American command tents, the atmosphere is relentless. Mistakes are dissected without mercy. Officers are challenged openly. If a plan fails, everyone knows why before the sun comes up again. There is no room for pride now, only performance. Senior commanders insist on combined arms, tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power working together as a single organism. Radios are tested constantly. Liaison officers are embedded where they can see and correct problems in real time. And when units perform well, they are pushed harder because the next battle won't forgive hesitation. For the soldiers, the transformation is personal. They stop thinking in terms of first battle or next battle. The war becomes a continuous pressure, a rhythm you either adapt to or get crushed by. Fear doesn't disappear, it changes, it becomes controlled. A private who once froze under artillery fire now checks his rifle, adjusts his helmet, and waits. A squad leader who once shouted orders now uses hand signals, conserving breath and calm. They've learned something essential at Kasserine. The enemy is not invincible, but he is unforgiving. Then comes the test. In early March, Axis forces attempt to push again, confident they can repeat their earlier success. German units advance with precision, Italian formations moving in support, expecting the Americans to crack under pressure as they did before. They do not.
American artillery pins advancing units in open ground. Infantry holds key terrain instead of abandoning it. Tanks maneuver with purpose, not panic. The fight is brutal, close, costly, but this time, when the dust settles, the line is still standing. Axis commanders are forced to pause. Italian officers scan the battlefield through binoculars and see something unsettling. American units reorganizing under fire instead of retreating. Casualties are evacuated efficiently. Guns are repositioned with intent. This is no longer an army learning how to fight. This is an army that has learned. The jokes stop. Quietly, almost unconsciously. Italian officers speak more carefully now. German commanders issue orders with increased caution. Intelligence officers revise assessments that once dismissed American capability entirely. No one says it out loud, but everyone feels it. The Americans are no longer predictable, and unpredictability is dangerous, because it means the next engagement won't follow old patterns. It means assumptions built at Kasserine no longer apply. It means the line that once collapsed might now hold or even advance. Somewhere in the Axis command structure, a realization begins to form. They didn't just face inexperienced troops in February. They trained them, and the bill for that lesson is about to come due.
Morning breaks over the Tunisian hills with a pale, unforgiving light. Dust hangs low in the air, kicked up by tracked vehicles and marching columns. The Axis offensive is moving again, not with the reckless confidence of Kasserine, but with calculation. Orders are precise, timetables tighter. German commanders study their maps carefully this time. They still believe they can break the Americans, but they no longer assume it will be easy. Italian units are placed more cautiously, reconnaissance is expanded, artillery is held back, ready to respond faster than before. This is what doubt looks like in an experienced army. The first clashes are probing actions. German infantry advances toward American positions, expecting the usual reaction: pullback, disorganization, gaps to exploit. Instead, they encounter prepared defenses. American forward observers call in artillery with calm efficiency. Shells fall exactly where they're needed, forcing Axis units to ground. Machine guns open from concealed positions, overlapping fields of fire that leave no easy route forward. German officers adjust. They always do. They shift tactics, attempting flanking maneuvers that worked weeks earlier. This time, American units anticipate them. Ambushes snap shut, mortar fire brackets advancing formations, tanks appear where no tanks were expected, hull down and waiting. The battlefield feels wrong. Italian officers begin to sense it. The Americans aren't reacting anymore. They're acting. Movements are deliberate, fire is disciplined, withdrawals when they happen are planned and covered, not panicked. This is deeply unsettling, because the Axis advantage has always been initiative, the ability to force opponents into mistakes through speed and aggression. That advantage is slipping. In one engagement after another, the Americans refuse to collapse. Losses are taken, ground is contested, but the line bends instead of breaking. Axis units begin to stall. Fuel runs low, ammunition expenditure climbs. Time, always the enemy, becomes a problem again. And for the first time, Axis commanders are forced to consider something they hadn't planned for. What if the Americans don't give way? Reports move up the chain. Enemy coordination markedly improved. Counter-battery fire increasingly effective. Air support responding with speed and precision. Italian officers exchange glances as they read them. This is not the army they laughed at.
American aircraft now appear with frightening regularity. Bombs fall on Axis supply routes, disrupting movements before attacks can even form. What once felt like a localized battlefield now feels connected, as if every American unit is part of a larger machine. Because it is. The lessons of Kasserine are being applied everywhere at once. By the end of the day, the Axis advance slows to a crawl. Not defeated, but checked. And in warfare, there is a critical difference. A stalled offensive is an exposed one. American commanders sense it. They don't rush. They wait. They watch. And when the order finally comes, it won't be to hold. It will be to push back. Somewhere behind the Axis lines, an Italian staff officer writes a report he never expected to write. He chooses his words carefully. The Americans have improved significantly. It is a quiet sentence, but it carries enormous weight. Because improvement in war doesn't stop, it compounds. The line hasn't collapsed yet, but the pressure has reversed, and now it's the Axis who are beginning to feel it.
The order comes without drama. No cheering, no speeches, just a brief transmission crackling over the radio. Advance. American units move forward cautiously at first, as if testing reality. Tanks roll out of cover, with infantry close behind, boots crunching over stone and sand. Artillery shifts its fire forward in controlled steps, lifting just long enough for troops to occupy ground that weeks earlier felt untouchable. This is not a charge. It is pressure. Axis defenses respond immediately. German guns open fire, accurate and lethal. Italian units dig in, fighting hard to hold what they've taken. The desert fills again with smoke and thunder. But something has changed. American attacks don't come in fragments anymore. They arrive layered, artillery, armor, infantry, air power, all striking in sequence. When resistance stiffens, they don't break contact blindly. They adapt, they maneuver, they wait for support. Italian officers watch the American advance through binoculars, tension creeping into their posture. They note how units leapfrog forward, how supply trucks move closer under cover of fire, how wounded are evacuated without chaos. These aren't boys anymore. These are professionals. In one engagement, an Italian defensive position holds against initial contact, then collapses under coordinated pressure. American artillery suppresses the guns, tanks pin the flanks, infantry closes in methodically, forcing surrender or retreat. Italian soldiers fall back in good order, but they fall back, and each step backward is a quiet admission. German commanders begin issuing withdrawal orders. Not routes, tactical withdrawals, the kind that acknowledge reality without admitting defeat. But every withdrawal costs fuel, ammunition, time, resources the Axis cannot easily replace in North Africa. American forces, by contrast, seem to grow stronger with each mile. Supply lines shorten, airfields move forward, the machine hums louder. The laughter from Kasserine is gone now. Italian officers speak in low voices, no longer joking, no longer dismissive. They refer to American units by designation instead of nickname. They mark them carefully on maps. Respect has replaced mockery. And in war, respect is often the last step before fear. As the Axis line bends again, Italian formations begin to feel the pressure most acutely. Coordination with German units becomes harder as communications stretch. Defensive positions that once felt secure are now exposed. American pressure doesn't let up. It doesn't have to. Time is on their side now. By the end of the engagement, the truth is unavoidable. The Americans who broke at Kasserine are gone. In their place stands an army that learned fast, adapted brutally, and returned with discipline and resolve. The Axis commanders see it clearly. They didn't just lose ground, they lost the initiative. And once initiative is gone, the collapse is only a matter of when, not if.
The collapse doesn't come all at once. It never does. It starts with a gap. A defensive position that was supposed to hold for hours falls in minutes. A unit that was meant to cover a flank withdraws earlier than planned. A radio message goes unanswered. Small failures, but in war, small failures multiply. American pressure increases steadily, like a tightening vise. Artillery pounds crossroads and supply routes. Fighter bombers scream down out of the sun, hitting columns on the move, scattering men and machines alike. Tanks advanced with infantry glued to their sides, methodical and relentless. Axis units begin to lose cohesion. Not courage, cohesion. Italian formations fight hard, but they are forced to react instead of plan. German commanders attempt to stabilize the line, but every attempt runs into the same problem. The Americans won't stop. Orders become increasingly defensive. Hold until nightfall, delay as long as possible, preserve combat power. These are not the words of an army expecting victory. They are the words of an army trying to survive. Italian officers feel the shift acutely. At Kasserine, they watched Americans break under pressure. Now they watch their own units do the same, slowly, unwillingly, but inevitably. Positions that once inspired confidence now feel exposed. Requests for reinforcement go unanswered or arrive too late. Ammunition runs low, fuel becomes precious, and overhead, American aircraft keep coming. The line finally gives way. Not with a dramatic rout, but with a rolling retreat that spreads from sector to sector. One withdrawal forces another. Gaps widen, coordination frays. American units exploit every opening. They don't rush blindly forward. They apply pressure where it hurts most. Italian and German units pull back toward more defensible terrain, but the rhythm is broken. The Americans stay in contact, denying rest, denying time to reorganize. This is the moment Axis commanders fear most, when the enemy understands momentum. For Italian officers who once laughed at the Americans, the realization is bitter. They misjudged not just the men, but the system behind them. An army that can absorb defeat, learn, reorganize, and return stronger is an army that cannot be dismissed lightly. The Americans didn't need years, they needed one hard lesson. As the Axis retreat continues, the desert bears witness to the reversal. Burned-out vehicles line the roads, not American ones this time. Abandoned equipment marks positions that were held too long or left too late. And behind it all, American units keep moving. Not triumphant, focused. The line has collapsed, and with it, a dangerous illusion. The illusion that the Americans would always be unready. But this battle is not the end, it is a warning. Because what happened here in North Africa will happen again in Sicily, in Italy, in France, and the Axis, whether they admit it or not, now understand exactly what kind of enemy they are facing. One that learns, one that adapts, one that comes back stronger. The retreat stabilizes just long enough for the Axis to breathe. Not recover, just breathe. German and Italian units dig into new positions, scraping shallow defenses into unfamiliar ground. Maps are redrawn again, orders rewritten. Commanders take stock of what remains. And for the first time, the assessments sound different. Not hopeful, not dismissive, realistic. Italian officers walk among their men, reading faces the way experienced soldiers do. They see fatigue, yes, but also confusion. The enemy was supposed to be predictable, supposed to be slow to adapt. Instead, the Americans have done something unsettling. They've learned faster than expected. far faster. In staff meetings, comparisons begin to surface. Someone mentions the British learning curve earlier in the Desert War. Another quietly notes how the Soviets absorbed catastrophic losses and still returned stronger. The implication hangs in the air. The Americans belong in that category now. Reports from the front grow increasingly blunt. Enemy units coordinating armor and infantry with growing efficiency. Artillery fire precise and adaptive. Air-ground coordination significantly improved. Italian officers no longer scoff at these lines, they underline them. The psychological shift is subtle, but decisive. At Kasserine, Axis commanders assumed the Americans would crumble under pressure. Now they must consider the opposite, that pressure only makes them sharper. This changes everything. Tactics that rely on intimidation no longer work. Feints don't cause panic. Sudden thrusts meet prepared responses. The Americans are no longer reacting to the battlefield. They are shaping it. And that realization weighs heavily, because experience teaches commanders a harsh truth. An enemy who improves rapidly is more dangerous than one who starts strong. One Italian officer, older than most, voices it quietly during a briefing. "They will not fight like this forever," he says. "They will fight better." No one disagrees. Across the lines, American units consolidate their gains. There is no celebration, only preparation. Positions are reinforced, supply routes secured, units rotated just enough to rest, not enough to lose momentum. Officers remind their men of Kasserine, not to shame them, but to anchor them. This is what happens when we forget the basics. The lesson is burned in now. The desert wind carries the sound of distant engines again. Not Axis this time, American. They are moving forward, and the Axis knows it. What began as laughter has turned into calculation. Calculation is colder, more dangerous. But it comes too late because the balance has already shifted. The Americans will keep learning, and the Axis, for the first time, understands what that means.
The desert does not remember laughter. It remembers tracks. Tank treads press deep into sand, boot prints layered over older ones, shell craters slowly softened by wind but never erased. Weeks after Kasserine, American units move through ground that once terrified them. Now it feels familiar, not safe, never safe, but understood. The men are different. They don't talk about home as much. They talk about spacing, timing, angles of fire. Helmets are scuffed now, uniforms stained and faded, faces leaner. This is an army that has been tested and survived. Commanders notice it in the details. Orders are executed faster. Questions are sharper. When something doesn't make sense, someone speaks up, not out of fear, but responsibility. The U.S. Army in North Africa is no longer a collection of units. It's becoming a system. Across the lines, Axis commanders feel the long shadow of Kasserine stretching forward. Every American move is now analyzed carefully. No assumption goes unchallenged. No position is taken lightly, because what happened once can happen again, in reverse. Italian officers, once openly dismissive, now warn their men, "Do not underestimate them." It is a sentence that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. The Desert War continues, brutal and unforgiving. Victories and losses follow on both sides, but the tone has changed. When Americans advance, the Axis reacts, not laughs. And somewhere in the minds of experienced officers, Italian and German alike, a larger realization settles in. North Africa was only the beginning. If this is how fast the Americans adapt here, what happens when they fight again? With more experience, more coordination, more resources? The answer is uncomfortable and unavoidable.
because Kasserine did not expose American weakness, it forged American strength, and the men who laughed at them were the first to understand the price of that mistake.
The desert grows quiet again. Not the tense quiet before battle, but the exhausted quiet that follows understanding. Axis commanders stand over maps late into the night, tracing lines that no longer hold meaning the way they once did. They speak softly now, carefully, every assumption weighed, every plan hedged, because the Americans are no longer an unknown quantity. They are known, and what is known is unsettling. Italian officers remember Kasserine differently now. What once felt like proof of American weakness has become the moment everything changed. The laughter that followed the first breakthrough now feels reckless, even foolish. Not because it was cruel, because it was premature. American units continue forward, methodical and disciplined. They don't chase glory, they don't rush. They apply pressure, consolidate gains, and move again. This is not an army improvising anymore. This is an army executing. The Axis fights on, bravely, professionally, often skillfully, but the dynamic is different. Each engagement costs more. Each withdrawal feels heavier. Momentum has a direction now, and it isn't in their favor. Somewhere behind the lines, an Italian officer writes another report. This one is longer, more detailed, less optimistic. He chooses his words carefully again. The Americans have become formidable. It is an understatement. The laughter that once drifted across the desert has vanished. In its place is something far more dangerous: respect. And respect, once earned in war, is never given lightly, because it means you see the enemy clearly, and you fear what they might become next.